Now, I suspect this might be a relatively short meeting because most of our hard work is done. But before we dive into anything, antitrust policy notice as usual, full antitrust policy on the LF website. Anyone from a member company, whether on this line or watching the recording, can direct questions to our counsel, Andy Updegrove. But to dive right into the topic of today, um, I think our language is done. I think we're done with the model provisions, probably. And then our discussion will be to confirm that and how we will choose to advertise it.
Mhm.
So I'm just going to share the language and pull it up here. I'm going to put into the chat a link to the language. There we go. So if you click that link, you'll see the model provisions we have in play. This is based on, gosh, I think we're about 5 or 6 calls into this, but quite frankly, most of the work is you, Andrew. We had other material which we've actually pushed into a second document, a document
Yeah.
previously known as the risk grid, and we've pared this one down to the pretty much the bare bones of a document Andrew passed over with a series of questions and then examples of language to help address them. To go over it with the people perhaps new to this, Andrew, would you like to say a few words and give some context, or not, as the case may be?
Yeah, absolutely. So this really arose from the idea that the OpenChain license compliance specification, so ISO 523/2020, provides great specification and framework. As we've decided, not simply to be able to establish an appropriate set of processes and procedures for developing software, but also it can be applied to other use cases as well. So the idea behind this is very straightforward. If you are acquiring software from an organization, there's a high probability that software is going to include open source code, and therefore you want to feel comfortable that the organization that is developing it is developing it in accordance with a set of sensible practices and procedures to ensure that it is compliant, and that you have access to all of the relevant information that you need so that when you pass it on to your customers, you're going to be compliant as well. And what better list of things that a company who is running an open source development program should be doing than the OpenChain specification. So if you look at this set of requirements alongside the OpenChain specification, you'll see that they map extremely closely onto each other. And the key point is that this works even if the company that you are procuring software from has not even heard of OpenChain, are not OpenChain, have not declared OpenChain compliance themselves. It basically, in that case, it acts as a checklist to say, these are all the things that you should be doing, which happen to be the same things that you should be doing if you're going to be OpenChain conformant. So rather than going into the sort of the detail of the language, if people look through it and they've got in the back of their minds that this maps very closely onto the requirements of the OpenChain specification, then they should understand where it's come from and the utility of it as well.
And I believe with this language that's in play today that we're showing here, we are effectively on the third call, I think, where we basically have this completed language in
Mhm.
play. People have had, therefore, 2 clear months to look at it and raise issues. And at this juncture, no one has opened issues on our legal mailing list or on GitHub, suggesting that any concerns have been found on the language, which leads me to believe then that we may have the model provisions tool we required to allow attorneys to pick this up and to potentially use it. And in fact, what we have today may be going further than what we initially set out to do in 2 ways. One is, as you said, Andrew, if someone goes through stuff like this and uses similar language, then their suppliers will basically become OpenChain conformant as a side effect, even if they've never heard of the standard before. So these model provisions, therefore, not only can help attorneys think through this, but if the attorneys use this type of approach, they'll be converting their supply chain into aligning with the global industry. Um,
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah, which is rather a good way to do it. And we've always hoped in open chain that procurement will be the primary driver. If we put enthusiasm and marketing behind adoption, we would only have a temporary impact on the market. By going into procurement, by going into that long cycle, we will be transformative. So I love the idea that this set of model provisions can help inspire attorneys to guide the supply chain in a direction that will be beneficial long term. Another interesting side effect of this language is that this thing is very compact, as a bunch of information to help attorneys think through stuff. So it's not actually that much in the way of model provisions. You're not looking at a massive amount of reading as an attorney. You can pick this up, have a look at it over lunch, and then be mulling over your options in the afternoon, which I think is a spectacularly
Hmm.
nice way to have it. And I mentioned there was a second document, the risk grid, which is a lot more hefty. I think it's under general compliance support material, risk grid. I'm going to open this. We're not going to dwell on it, but my point is the risk grid has tons of further reading for attorneys who want to have lots and lots of further reading about options, talking about not just open chain related stuff, but essentially open source related stuff, or in general, commercial transaction related stuff. So regarded as an enormous appendix of sample provisions. So what we have here is potentially completed model provisions for our primary task, OpenChain. And after we mark this as done, a secondary document which can be the further reading of model provisions for attorneys who want to see what the rest are up to. I'm going to pause here and see if anyone's got any questions or comments. I noticed a few people unmuted themselves briefly. If you have questions or comments, now is the moment to jump in. Ominous silence indicating total agreement. The important thing then we have is the question is, it looks ready. We haven't had complaints about it. We have this document which looks done. Then that bigger document I showed you, the risk grid, needs work. Most of it is old and finished, about 15 years old, but we need to make it easier to parse. But putting that aside, the risk grid is a conversation for future meetings. The model provisions we have today, the link that was in the chat looks ready. And the question to this audience is, does anyone think it's not ready? Which you can say at any point now. If no one objects, then the real question for us is, how do we advertise it? And the reason that's a question is because we want to be cautious. We don't want to make people think that they have to look at our model provisions and those equate to prescriptions. You don't have to look at this, indeed you shouldn't look at this as a prescription of what you should operate in your procurement. This is a set of models to help you think. Your procurement is your procurement. At the same time, we want to make sure that people know that this is there. So we want to advertise it widely. We want to make sure that people realize here is potential inspiration. It's freely available. It's licensed in a manner that you can chop and cut and do whatever you want to it. We don't care. It's a reference material. Go for it. And therefore, what we have to do is balance, how does the project advertise it? How do we get it into the hands of attorneys? And my suggestion would be that we make it pretty central to OpenChain's messaging in Q4, that there's model provisions to help you. And we put it pretty front forward on our website, which is a slight evolution. Our website is tended towards people concerned with compliance, and of course that includes attorneys, but we haven't yet put a legal document, as in like model provisions, on our front page and said, hey, look here. But I think we should actually do that with this. I think we should do it as part of saying that OpenChain not only builds standards and has general reference material, but it's not just reference material for an OSPO or similar. This goes right to your IP department and legal as well. Here you are. And in this way, to explain very clearly to people the depth of our material available and the different teams it can apply to. Just want to pause and see if anyone's got any comments on that.
Shane, one thing that sorry that if you heard that noise in the background, apologies. A phone call came in, which I just tried to get rid of. If you want to have a sort of separate Zoom call at some point, just 5 minutes, which we can record, and then you can basically interview me about it. We can discuss it, and maybe we can run through it extremely quickly. If you wanted to use that as a piece of material, that's a thought, something that we could put a link to on the website as well.
I want to do that next week then. I'll
Yeah,
actually use that perhaps um, as the central indicator of why people need this. So we'll record that. We'll put that up on the website. For those of you who aren't familiar, our website is continually getting tweaks and improvements. Here's our current front-facing page, opening now, and there we are. So our current front-facing page is talking about the standards we make, best practices, and so on. And my intent then would be to probably add a new section in the very first page, talking about our reference material and potentially calling this out, uh, and perhaps linking to a dedicated page, pointing then to reference material for lawyers, stuff that lawyers might arrive on our GitHub and want to find, the model provisions, the risk grid, um, compliance checklists, things like that. So to spin up a new legal page that we link from our front page. And yeah, Andrew, I'd like to make this central to it. So let's schedule something for next week, make it happen.
excellent.
Question for others. If we're going to spin up OpenChain page for attorneys, let's say the OpenChain legal page, where we currently have various resources to interlink, I would like to suggest that it may be useful for our legal friends to have a look at our repository in general and see if there's stuff that should be included. What do you think? Okay, so I'm going to give you an example of stuff that might be included. We have checklists here, GPL compliance flowcharts. I'm going to pull up the flowcharts. Here's an over-the-air compliance flowchart. A very simple one, of course. These are based on old PDF documents we used to have and which have been replaced, but that we would potentially be using as the basis for future documents. Like this GPL2 compliance is old hat. Most companies have it nailed for a decade or more, but people could look at these and think, well, gosh, here's an LGPL flowchart, and I actually want to have a flowchart for the AGPL. Maybe I can start here and work from there. We have license info specifications. This came from someone else, which is just about the Commons Conservancy and about how to include license info. And that we make a legal page that includes a variety of this information, starting with model provisions as the key, including a few of these other things down below. And then that's our page to send lawyers to get them onboarded, with the model provisions being where we really want them to get started, and their attention can wander after that. Any comments on that? Okay. Given that people seem relatively happy with this, then I would flag that the work for us ahead is two-part. One is to have a look at this risk grid thing, which is going into this chat, the risk grid, which we will start editing on the next call and improving. Meanwhile, I will tidy it up and make it easier to parse. The other question we'll have relates to our document, where I'm getting back to, I think, should be. Yes, there we go. To our current document. The release version of these model provisions has a relatively strong bias towards, I think at this juncture, a strong bias towards ISO 5230. the license compliance ISO standard, which is the one that's going deepest in the market and is the one most critical to address. But ancillary to this, as we go to market with ISO 18974, we should consider in future generations, do we need to add more material specific to that or not into the model provisions? And that's a topic for the next item. Though I do think if we look at the current document, what it covers is also extremely useful for 18974. And in actuality, what we'd probably be doing is looking at adding a few more examples and the, and ors, depending on which standard you're using. And in the future, we may have our work cut out for us. As you know, the OpenChain project has started talking about building other specifications. A contribution spec has completed its kickoff call in August, and we'll be developing it from September onwards. The contribution spec is about process management. But as that occurs, it's possible we'll want to expand our model provisions to cover aspects of this as well. To say if you're uh, going to be a company, let's say, in our supply chain developing software for us, but you're also going to be contributing software to projects, please keep track of what's going where. So if what we're meant to get is proprietary, you haven't just given it to a project, and so on and so forth. Just process management. Maybe it's something we will think about, maybe not. Okay. This is therefore done as the first generation of this, and it will be released next week. Let's put a date on it. Andrew, how about we try and record and so on in the early part of the week, and then we release this document on Thursday. So that will be the 7th of September.
Yeah, that sounds good. I'm sure we can find some time, sort of Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. So yeah,
Absolutely.
fantastic. Okay, so yeah, you and I will liaise separately to arrange that.
Great. So on the 7th of September, OpenChain on the front page will start advertising the model provisions. We will have a new legal page looking into a lot of our reference material. And then the next call here in 1 month, we'll be looking again at the risk grid, a much larger document, which will provide the deeper reading section for attorneys that want further model provisions. As discussed on previous calls, this model provision document will be living. We're going to continually update it, and therefore its home will remain GitHub. We're not going to be looking at doing point releases on it. Once it goes to release version, that's it. And that's purposeful. We don't want to give the impression that there's a canonical version of this or it's a panacea. This document is going to be living on GitHub, updated on GitHub, and serves as a reference example. The same will be true of the deeper dive risk grid. Before the 7th of September, you have a brief moment to do any sanity checks you require. And if anyone sees a red alert, let us know. Otherwise, we're going live. Thank you, Andrew, especially for making this happen. And thank you to everyone over the last few months for keeping your eyes on this and contributing thoughts and ideas to make sure that what might seem like a modest endeavor is providing a product that goes into the supply chain and helps those attorneys who have no time and no experience in this field to pick up something and to get an idea of where to go.
Yeah, can I just take this opportunity to also say thank you to Tim, who's on the call as well. He's my colleague, so he's also been working on some of this in the background. So thanks, Tim.
Oh, Tim. Well, gosh, unsung hero.
Yeah,
Thank you very much for helping make this happen. It is incredibly valuable. We have a huge amount of companies telling us they don't know how to get started in this field. And we also have a huge amount of attorneys telling us, I'm not familiar with this. Where do I get started? And previously the answer was, well, join legal networks or events. Now we'll be able to say, read this. Okay. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Have a beautiful day, and I'll talk with you soon.
thanks all. Bye bye now.
Bye bye.